The large blue butterfly is actually quite small, about 1.5 inches across. It is, however, bigger just than the common blue or any of the other species of blue butterfly that you might see fluttering over the sun-baked turf of the hills and heaths of southern England. The silver-studded blue, the chalk-hill blue, the Adonis and the holly blue. During the 19th century, it was also the rarest of the blues. Those two qualities, the rarest and the biggest, are, of course, an almost lethal combination for any animal. Collectors find the coupling irresistible, and during the 19th century, when butterfly collecting was a passion that possessed not just schoolboys, but almost every kind of Victorian gentleman who had the time to spare, the large blue became one of the most sought-after of all British butterflies. The zeal with which these collectors pursued their prizes was extraordinary. One clergyman wrote in triumph to a fellow enthusiast, saying that he had found a large blue colony and taken 100 specimens from it in a single day. Not surprisingly, the large blue became rarer and rarer, and by the middle of the last century, it was clear that the species was approaching extinction. Conservationists identified the last remaining colonies. Fences were put up to protect them. Cattle and sheep were rigorously excluded, and wardens kept watch to guard against illegal collectors. But the number of butterflies in these last colonies got smaller and smaller each year. It was as though, no matter how carefully the large blue was protected, it had developed a death wish. And in 1979, the last known colony on Dartmoor disappeared. Britain had lost its large blue. Just before that happened, however, a young scientist, Jeremy Thomas, who was working for his doctorate, was given the task of studying the last survivors. For 6 years, to use his own words, he lived beside the Dartmoor colony, recording everything visible and measuring everything measurable. What he discovered was not only complicated, but truly extraordinary. The adult large blue lays its eggs on the plants of wild thyme. The caterpillar, when it hatches, burrows into the thyme's flower bud and feeds on the developing seeds. If there are several caterpillars in the same bud, as there may be, then they become cannibals, eating one another until only one remains. As this one grows, it molts until eventually, with a flick of its body, it falls to the ground and crawls into a crevice in the earth. Before long, almost inevitably, it's found by a worker ant. The ant becomes hugely excited, crawling all over the caterpillar, licking its skin and sipping nectar, liquid that the caterpillar produces from a small gland at the end of its body. Other ants may arrive to join in the feeding frenzy, but as far as the first one is concerned, it's finders keepers, and eventually it drives away all the others. This goes on for some time, on occasion for as long as 4 hours, and then suddenly the caterpillar hunches itself up so that its otherwise somewhat flabby body becomes taut. Now it has much the same feel as an ant larva, and what is more, it's much the same size. The ants certainly seem to think that that's what it is, for it picks up the caterpillar and carries it back to the nest. Once there, the caterpillar makes its way into the chamber containing the young ant larvae and starts to eat them. It crawls over its victim, bites its skin and sucks out the content of the larva's body. It does this repeatedly in bursts of activity, and as the weeks pass, it grows fast. The ants may at this stage realise that they've got a stranger in their midst, in which case they will kill it. But if the caterpillar survives for 5 weeks or so, it will have become so big and developed such a tough skin that it can withstand any attacks. This association with ants was well known to Victorian collectors, but it was Jeremy Thomas who discovered in detail what happens next. The caterpillar stays in the nest for a year, sometimes even 2 years, during which time it becomes 100 times heavier than a worker ant and will have eaten 1,200 of the colony's grubs. It also mimics the tiny sounds made by a queen ant, and the workers treat it as a queen, licking secretion from its skin. And then, fully grown, it turns into a chrysalis, developing the hard, horny covering within which it will transform itself into an adult butterfly. Around the end of June, at the height of summer, the chrysalis's skin splits and out crawls the crumple-winged adult, making a sudden burst of queen ant-like sounds as it does so. The ants now become hugely excited, fussing around it as it crawls out of the nest into the outside world. There its wings expand, and it becomes a blue butterfly that we would recognise, and prepares to make its mating flight. So why did the butterfly become extinct when collecting had become effectively stopped? Jeremy Thomas made two key discoveries. First, there are 5 different but closely related kinds of red ant that are virtually indistinguishable to any but the expert entomologist. All will pick up a large blue caterpillar and take it to their nest. Once there, however, most worker ants will recognise it as an alien and sting it to death. But if the ants belong to one particular species, Myrmica sabuleti, then they don't behave in that way, for the caterpillar produces a chemical message, a pheromone, from pores in its skin that exactly matches the pheromone produced by the sabuleti ants themselves. So instead of stinging it, the sabuleti workers treat it as though it were one of their own. The second of Jeremy's discoveries concerns the ants. He found out that sabuleti ants are very sensitive to heat and humidity. Unless those conditions are within a very narrow range, the sabuleti ant disappears. The temperature of the ground, however, is crucially affected by the height of the vegetation. If the turf is only a few millimetres too high, the sun will not warm the ground beneath to the temperatures that sabuleti require. Sheep, and indeed rabbits, will keep turf down to that length. So the well-intentioned protection given to the sites, keeping away sheep and rabbits, only succeeded in making the ground uninhabitable for sabuleti, and therefore the large blue. With this knowledge, it became possible to plan the reintroduction of the large blue to Britain. A virtually identical population was found in Sweden. A team of conservationists, led by David Simcox, brought over pupae and put them in sabuleti nests on a highly secret site, Site X it was called, on Dartmoor. That was in 1983. Now, a quarter of a century later, large blue butterflies are jinking and flirting on the hillsides, not only on Dartmoor, but on 24 other sites in southern England. But there's a further twist to this complex story. Populations of the Alcon blue, a close relative of the large blue that lives on the continent, have a parasite, an ichneumon wasp, a raffishly handsome insect with long elegant legs and a glossy black and scarlet body. In some extraordinary way that has not yet been identified, it can tell from the briefest inspection of the outside of the ant's nest whether or not it contains a butterfly caterpillar. If it does, then the ichneumon makes its way inside. As you might expect, the ants immediately attack it. The ichneumon doesn't attempt to disguise itself with an ant pheromone. Instead, it sprays the attacking ants with a chemical which makes them attack one another. And while they're locked in battle, it makes its way through the melee, finds the Alcon blue caterpillar, which it knows is there, stabs it with its ovipositor, and deposits its egg within the caterpillar's body. The caterpillar is not killed. On the contrary, it continues to feed on the ant pupae, but eventually, when it pupates, what emerges from the chrysalis is not a butterfly, but an ichneumon. A similar but slightly different species of ichneumon was known to parasitize the large blue. So the question arises, should we welcome such an ichneumon back? In my own view, we certainly should. The beauty of our large blue is incontestable. But one of the most wonderful things about the natural world, for me, is its marvellous, intricate complexity. And what could exemplify that more astonishingly than the intertwining of the lives of the sabuleti ants, the ichneumon, and the large blue butterfly?